She was on her knees in the mud, fingers trembling, breath caught somewhere between a prayer and a curse. The storm hadn't let up for hours. Wind screamed through the pine ridges like a chorus of ghosts, rain hammering down in chaotic bursts. Beneath the thundering sky, Claire Dawson hovered just outside a narrow hollow dug beneath a fallen cedar tree. Inside lay a female lynx, belly heaving, eyes glassy with pain. Claire had seen death before, countless times, in operating rooms and roadside accidents. But nothing prepared her for this. The quiet kind. The kind that comes silently, stealing life between labored breaths and failing muscle. The lynx had been in labor too long. Her flanks quivered with each contraction, but nothing moved. No sound, no life. Claire reached a hand forward, stopped, pulled it back. "Don't give up on me now," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding rain. "Not after everything." She didn't even know why she said it. Maybe it was to the lynx, maybe to herself. 10 feet away, watching with unnerving stillness, sat the male lynx. Broad-shouldered, scarred across one ear, soaked to the bone, but unmoving. His eyes locked on Claire. Not a growl, not a twitch, just a steady, ancient gaze that refused to blink. Claire had never seen anything like it, and she had no idea what she was about to do would change the rest of her life. It had started, like most stories of healing do, with heartbreak. Just over a year earlier, Claire had left Spokane General Hospital for good. After 17 years as an ER trauma nurse, she walked out without ceremony. The day before had been her son's birthday. Noah would have been 20. Instead, she spent the day sewing up a drunk driver who had walked away from a crash that had killed a teenager on a motorcycle. She never said a word to her colleagues, just hung up her ID badge, emptied her locker, and drove north, deep into the Kootenai wilderness. For 6 months, she barely spoke to another soul. Took up work with a nonprofit wildlife group that partnered with state rangers. Mostly radio tagging owls, mapping wolf tracks, checking trail cams. It was the quiet that saved her at first. The kind of quiet only mountains can offer. But even mountains have voices, if you're still enough to hear them. In late February, the first sighting happened. Claire was refilling feed blocks near a frozen stream bed when she caught movement in the snow. A large lynx stepped silently across the ridge, stopping just long enough for their eyes to meet. Broad chest, thick winter coat dusted in frost, and one ear slashed clean across the top. He was alone, or so she thought. Over the next few weeks, sightings increased. The male appeared regularly, never aggressive, never fleeing, always watching. Claire started leaving bits of venison further from the cameras, just to see if he'd take them. He did. Every time. Then came the surprise. She spotted a second lynx, smaller, cautious, and unmistakably pregnant. It was rare enough to see one. But 2? A bonded pair? Unheard of. Lynx were solitary by nature. Mating season was brief, impersonal. Males usually left before birth. But this one, he stayed. He hunted. He guarded. Claire documented everything. She marked down dates, behaviors, temperatures. But part of her notes started to drift. She began naming them. Not officially, of course. The female she called Willow. The male, Bear. Because he reminded her of strength wrapped in silence. Because when he looked at her, it felt less like being watched and more like being understood. One morning in early May, Claire found fresh tracks. Deep impressions around the cedar hollow. She backed away immediately. This had become their den. She wouldn't interfere. Not unless... That unless came 2 weeks later. with the storm. It rolled in like a grudge, fast, cold, angry. Snow in May wasn't unheard of, but this was something else. Sleet, thunder, even hail. Claire had been checking a motion sensor when she caught sight of Willow stumbling near the den's edge. Something was wrong. At first, she hesitated. Standard wildlife protocol was clear. Observe, don't interfere. Let nature run its course. But this wasn't nature's design. This was disaster, and she could feel it. In the silence between contractions, in the panic behind Willow's dull eyes. Claire radioed the mobile vet unit, but the storm had knocked out signal. No choice. She grabbed the emergency med kit from the back of her ATV, slung her son's old flannel shirt over her shoulder, something she always wore on long field days, and walked through the rain toward the den. And that's where she was now, kneeling in the mud, watching a wild creature she'd come to know in silence, struggling between life and death. And Bear, watching her. The first time Claire saw Bear linger after feeding, she thought it was coincidence. Most male lynx would bolt the moment their job was done. Mate, move on, disappear. But Bear, he waited. Not just once, over and over. He'd hunt at dawn and return with precision, always placing his kill just outside the den. Then he'd sit, guarding, sometimes for hours, eyes never drifting far from Willow. Once, Claire watched through binoculars as he gently touched his nose to hers, then sat beneath a snow-laden spruce, tail curled around his legs like a sentry in prayer. It didn't make sense, but nature rarely does when it bends its own rules. Claire started leaving her trail cam active around the outer edge of their known radius. What she captured was something quiet and breathtaking. A wild male lynx showing unmistakable signs of paternal behavior, guarding, grooming, even scent marking the den perimeter. The footage was clean, soft, poetic in its own way. She didn't share it, not right away. Some things feel too sacred for science. Instead, Claire kept watch. From the same rocky overlook every morning, sipping weak coffee from a dented thermos, scribbling notes into her weather-warped field journal. The page edges curled from snowmelt and storm. But the ink remained. It wasn't just about the lynx anymore. The more time she spent near them, the more something old and aching inside her began to stir. She'd often wake before dawn, not from alarm, but memory. Her son, Noah, used to curl up on the couch in that same plaid flannel, bright red against his pale skin, as he watched cartoons in winter. After he was gone, she couldn't bring herself to pack it away. It smelled like cinnamon cereal and faint cologne. Eventually, she started wearing it during field work. Told herself it was just for warmth. But it was more than that. One morning, Claire arrived early to the overlook and found Bear already there. Not at the den, but halfway up the path she always used. He didn't flee, he just stood there, still, watching. Then he blinked, a slow, deliberate blink. It was probably meaningless in the scientific sense. But Claire felt it land inside her like something sacred, a sign, a truce, maybe even an invitation. That same evening, the first snow in weeks dusted the treetops again. Claire stood on the ridge, hands in her coat pockets, eyes locked on the hollow. Willow didn't appear. For the past few days, she'd been retreating deeper into the den. Claire guessed it was close, maybe within a week. The real concern was the weather. Spring in the Kootenai could turn cruel fast. And it did. The next morning, the sky collapsed. Heavy gray clouds devoured the peaks before noon. Winds toppled branches. Sleet turned the trails to slippery veins of mud and crushed pine. Claire's radio crackled with half-sent messages from nearby stations, but none made it through clearly. She should have turned back. Protocol said she should observe only. But instincts are louder than rules when your heart's involved. Around midday, she spotted movement, a flicker of fur just beyond the den. Willow had emerged, staggering, belly distended, mouth parted as she panted against the wind. Bear wasn't nearby. Claire froze, watched as the lynx collapsed, then tried to stand again, only to fall back into the hollow. Her breathing was sharp, irregular. Then came the contractions, visible, harsh. Nothing followed. No sound. No cub. Claire's breath caught. "Not now," she whispered, gripping the pine sapling beside her like a lifeline. "Not like this." She watched for nearly 20 minutes. Each time Willow tried to push, the effort weakened. Her paws trembled. Her head dropped low. Then came the sound Claire would never forget. A low, desperate moan, not loud, not violent, just giving up. It shattered something in her. By the time she reached the ATV, the storm had kicked up sideways rain and stabbing wind. Claire grabbed the emergency field kit, slung her flannel shirt tighter around her chest, and climbed toward the den, boots sinking into slush. She still didn't have a full plan. Just instinct. 10 feet from the hollow, Bear reappeared. He was soaked. Mud streaked across his chest, his thick coat matted from snow. But his posture was calm. He stood at the tree line, staring straight at her. Claire didn't speak, didn't move, just waited. And then again, he blinked. Slow, trusting, or perhaps just tired. He turned, padded toward the left edge of the clearing, and sat, watching. Claire stepped into the den entrance, heart pounding, voice soft. "Easy now, Mama," she said, kneeling. "I'm here to help. Just breathe." There was blood, and the faintest movement. A tiny paw, stuck, breach. She felt her fingers tremble, not from fear, from memory. She'd done this once, long ago, in a field hospital after a flood. Delivered a child while lightning tore through the sky. Now she was here, in the wilderness, cradling the future of a wild creature who had never asked for help, but hadn't denied it either. The wind howled overhead. Claire took a breath and reached in. "Come on, little one. Let's get you home." Claire's hands were soaked and freezing, the mud seeping through her knees as she crouched in the den's narrow opening. Her fingers moved with the slow, practiced rhythm of someone who had once coaxed life from the edge of death. She felt the tiny form shift beneath her touch. A fragile body turned the wrong way. A breech birth. And in the wild, that often meant death. But not today. "Easy now," she whispered, though the lynx could hardly hear her over the storm. "I've got you. Just a little more." Willow gave a shuddering breath. Her eyes fluttered open, dull, unfocused, but present. She didn't growl, didn't claw, just watched. Claire gently adjusted the position of the tiny kit, using the curve of her thumb and forefinger to guide it forward. Then, as if summoned by some invisible signal, Willow pushed. A long, strained groan cut through the den, and then, release. The kit slid free into Claire's hands, a slick, fragile thing, no bigger than a mitten, limbs limp, mouth silent. For a terrifying second, Claire thought it might already be too late. She cleared its nose, wiped mucus from its face with the corner of her flannel, and gently rubbed the chest. "Come on, little one. Come on." Then, a sound. A tiny gasping squeak. Weak, but alive. Claire nearly laughed. Instead, she looked at Willow, who was already lifting her head, instinct pulling her toward her newborn. Claire placed the kit beside her, retreating a few inches into the mouth of the hollow. Willow licked her baby once, twice, then again with more force. The kit responded with a louder cry, squirming against her fur. Behind Claire, the storm cracked open the sky. Thunder rolled over the hills. But inside that den, there was only the quiet sound of life beginning. "One down," Claire breathed, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Her breath fogged the air. Her knees ached. But her heart was wide open. It wasn't over. Willow's sides convulsed again, another contraction, this one smoother, more coordinated. Within minutes, a second kit arrived. This time, Claire didn't need to intervene. She watched, waited, let nature reclaim its rhythm. 20 minutes later, a third followed. Smaller, but loud. Feisty. All three kits pressed into Willow's belly, eyes still closed, tiny mouths searching for warmth. Claire backed out of the den slowly, trying not to disturb the moment. Her heart was thundering louder than the storm. She turned, and there he was, Bear. Closer now, no more than 6 feet away. His head tilted slightly, watching her, not with suspicion, but something deeper, something almost human in its intensity. Claire froze. He stepped forward. In his mouth was a freshly killed snowshoe hare, its body limp in his jaws. Somehow, despite the downpour, despite the chaos, he'd hunted. For them. He stopped at the edge of the den, dropped the hare gently, then looked up at Claire. Her breath caught in her throat. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't angry. He was acknowledging her, maybe even thanking her. Claire didn't move. She didn't dare. Tears welled in her eyes, uninvited but unstoppable. For the first time in a long time, they weren't from pain. Bear stepped past her, not with aggression, not with fear, but with the silent confidence of a father returning home. He entered the den, nuzzled Willow's face, then lay beside her, his body curving protectively around hers and the kit's. Claire watched them for a long moment. The storm still raged above, but the hollow was calm now, a sanctuary carved out of wildness and will. She slowly gathered her gear, packed away her gloves, and took one last look. Willow's eyes met hers. Not wild, not tame, just tired, trusting. Bear didn't look back. He was already focused on the newborns, grooming their wet fur with careful strokes of his tongue. Claire turned away, the mud pulling at her boots with every step. She didn't rush. At the edge of the clearing, she stopped, reached into her pack, pulled out the flannel shirt, Noah's shirt. She walked back to the stump near the den, folded the shirt slowly, and laid it there. A quiet gift, a gesture of understanding. Then she left. The rain faded overnight, but the forest remained soaked in silence. The kind of silence that follows a storm. Not peace exactly, but the breath-holding quiet that comes just after something big has passed. Claire returned to her observation ridge just after dawn. The sky was washed in pale gold, and low mist clung to the treetops like wool. She hadn't slept. Not really. A few restless hours curled in the back of her truck, with dreams that smelled of cedar, blood, and newborn fur. She trained her scope toward the den. At first, nothing moved. Then, just barely visible in the low light, Bear stepped out. He stretched, shoulders rippling beneath his thick coat, then shook off the damp, sending droplets flying. His ears twitched. He sniffed the air, then padded down the slope and disappeared into the trees. Gone hunting. Willow remained inside. Claire could see the faintest flicker of her breath against the morning chill. A tiny paw lifted, then tucked back into warmth. The kits were alive. They'd made it through the night. Claire let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Over the next several days, the forest slowly returned to rhythm. The snow melted into soft earth. Birds returned to their songs, and the lynx family settled into their fragile, quiet routine. Claire never approached the den again. Instead, she monitored from a distance. Notes, sketches, quiet reflections scrawled across the pages of her field journal. She logged when Bear returned with prey. What kind? How often? Noted the subtle shift in Willow's posture, how she no longer dragged herself outside but walked, slowly, steadily, always returning to the kits with purpose. Once, Claire spotted her dragging the old flannel shirt into the hollow. She had no explanation for it, none she needed. That night, Claire sat beside her campfire, fingers curled around a chipped enamel mug. The flames cracked and hissed as if retelling her story in their own language. She held the journal open, staring at her own handwriting. May 17th, 3 kits born. Storm birth. Male brought prey, did not interfere, observed, allowed. She flipped the page. What makes something wild? Teeth, territory, or the refusal to need us? Another line below. Or the courage to let us close? She stared into the fire a long time after that. About a week after the birth, Claire spotted the first signs of movement beyond the den. 2 of the kits, clumsy, fluffy, eyes wide, emerged for just a few feet before tumbling over each other and darting back inside. It was only a flash, a flicker of curiosity. But it made Claire smile in a way that felt real, unforced. Later that afternoon, she caught Bear teaching, or something like it. He'd brought a still warm squirrel, not to feed, but to place near the kits. One paw at a time, he nudged the carcass toward them, waited, then demonstrated how to paw and stalk. Claire wrote in her journal, male teaching hunt behaviors, kits unsure, mother watching but not interfering, family dynamic intact. Then she paused. Underneath, she scribbled, like watching a memory in reverse. Each day brought something new. The kits grew bold. Willow ventured further. Bear expanded his patrols. And Claire, for the first time in years, felt herself rooting into something that didn't just keep her alive, but made her feel. One evening, while packing up her scope, she heard something behind her. A twig snap, a low breath. She turned slowly. Nothing. Then, on the edge of the ridge, Bear appeared, closer than he'd ever been. He didn't blink this time. He simply stood there, wind brushing through his fur, eyes calm. Claire didn't move. She knew this moment didn't belong to her, not fully, but it was being shared. After a while, Bear turned, walked a few steps, then paused. He looked back once, then disappeared into the trees. She sat there long after he was gone, the light fading, the air cooling. And when she finally stood, her knees stiff, her hands numb, Claire realized something had shifted. Not out there, in her. By early June, the highland air had softened. Wildflowers bloomed between the rocks, and the creeks that once raged with stormwater now trickled gently across moss-covered stone. The forest was alive again. But Claire remained cautious. New life was fragile. Too much could still go wrong. The kits were growing fast. Claire could now distinguish them by size and fur markings. One had a darker patch on its left ear. Another had an awkward limp that slowly improved with each passing day. They played constantly, chasing, wrestling, practicing pounces on insects and leaves. Bear remained ever present. He returned with prey more frequently now, sometimes twice a day. Once, Claire saw him return empty-mouthed, only to leave again without even resting. It was as if the weight of fatherhood, rare as it was in Lynx, had settled on him fully. Willow, meanwhile, regained her strength. She no longer dragged her steps. Her eyes had a new brightness. Her body, though leaner, moved with purpose. She began teaching the kits to follow, first for short distances, then for longer trails into the brush. Claire watched from her ridge. She documented, yes, but more and more she simply sat in silence, observing, letting the forest speak. Then came the day that rattled everything. It started like any other. Clear sky, distant hawks. Claire had just returned from checking a trap camera farther north when she noticed something off. Her scope was pointed toward the den, but there was no movement, no Willow, no kits, no bear. She waited. An hour passed. Still nothing. A strange pit opened in her stomach. The kind she hadn't felt since the night she received the call about Noah. She packed her gear and made her way down the ridge. The area around the den was undisturbed. No signs of struggle. No blood. No prints she didn't recognize. But it was empty. Silent in a way that wasn't peaceful. A silence that felt like absence. She stood there for a long time, unsure whether to feel relieved or abandoned. Had they moved dens? Had something gone wrong? The flannel shirt was still there, draped over a flat stone near the entrance. Damp from morning dew, but untouched. Claire sat on a log, elbows on her knees, fingers steepled beneath her chin. She didn't realize she was crying until she tasted salt. The next 3 days passed in anxious silence. She checked every camera, rescanned every route. No signs, no sightings. By day 4, Claire began to accept what her training had always warned her about. Wild animals don't say goodbye. They just vanish. Maybe they'd relocated. Maybe the kits hadn't made it. Maybe something worse. She stopped journaling, stopped sitting at the ridge. There was nothing left to witness. She moved camp farther south, focused on mapping a new wolf den. She told herself it was better this way, no attachment, no heartbreak. But every night, she left the radio on, volume low. Listening, it was on the 7th night that the call came. Not a ranger, not a vet. Just a low, rasping hiss through the static. Faint. Fragmented. Then her name. "Claire, you there?" She grabbed the receiver. "Yeah, I'm here. Go ahead." "You're going to want to come up to Fireline Ridge. Northern camera triggered twice this morning. Big male lynx. Might be your guy." Her heart slammed against her ribs. Before the ranger even finished, Claire was already moving. She rode fast, the ATV growling beneath her as she climbed the narrow trail. When she arrived, the early light was just beginning to filter through the canopy. She followed the flagged path until she reached the camera post. And there, clear as morning, were prints. Large, fresh, deep. A lynx had passed through just hours ago, and something else beside them. Tiny paw prints, 3 of them. Claire sank to her knees. They were alive. She wasn't sure whether it was relief or something else, something deeper. A quiet kind of joy that didn't need to be loud to be real. They hadn't vanished. They had moved on. The forest had shifted, and the lynx family had shifted with it. She stood up slowly, brushing her hands on her thighs, and turned toward the clearing. That's when she saw it. A dark shape just at the edge of the trees. Bear. He was watching. Again, just watching. Claire didn't wave, didn't speak. She simply nodded. And in that stillness, In that unspoken recognition, everything made sense. Sometimes goodbyes aren't endings. Sometimes they're just the forest changing shape around us, and sometimes trust doesn't need to be seen to be felt. Claire didn't return to the den after that. It wasn't out of sadness. It was respect. She'd done her part. They had done theirs. And now the story was moving forward without her in it. That was the way it had to be. But something inside her had changed. She still worked the northern range, still hiked the ridgelines and checked the camera traps, but the urgency was gone, replaced by something gentler. She no longer needed the data to justify the hours. She just wanted to be near the heartbeat of it all. One morning, nearly a month after that last sighting, she arrived at the overlook and found a single feather resting on her gearbox. Long, pale gray. An owl's, most likely. Nothing remarkable, except it hadn't been there the night before. Claire stared at it for a long time. In the past, she might have logged it as coincidence. But now she let herself believe in small gestures. Wordless acknowledgments, like slow blinks, or feathers, or the scent of an old flannel pulled into a hollow. The summer passed gently. The heat arrived, but without violence. Rain came in soft intervals. The forest thrived. Cubs were reported in other territories. Elk calves fattened in the valleys. Wolves howled in the distance at dusk. But they stayed clear of Fireline Ridge. She heard occasional whispers from other rangers. A lynx sighted farther east. Kits seen chasing butterflies on the edges of a huckleberry patch. But nothing definitive. It was enough. Then, in late July, Claire was called to speak at a regional conservation event. Just a small gathering, biologists, volunteers, a few old friends from her hospital days who had since traded city life for fieldwork. She didn't want to go at first. Talking about what happened felt like peeling open a wound that had finally stopped aching, but she owed it to the story, and to Bear. Her voice was calm as she spoke. She skipped the technical notes. Instead, she told them what it felt like to kneel in the mud beside a dying lynx, unsure of whether she was saving or interfering. She described the storm, the first cry of a newborn kid, and the look in a wild male's eyes that told her he understood something she hadn't yet found words for. She told them about the silence afterward, the vanishing, the tracks, and she ended with a simple truth. We weren't rescuers. We weren't saviors. We were just witnesses to something rare, something real. The room was quiet when she finished. No applause, just that same kind of silence, the kind that lingers when people are holding their breath. Someone in the back finally whispered, "Were they okay?" Claire nodded. "I think so." That night, she returned to her camp, sat under the stars with a cup of coffee, her old flannel wrapped tight around her shoulders. She listened to the night. No wind, no rain, just the whisper of pine and the distant call of a night bird. Then, a rustle, just off the ridge. Her head turned slowly, and there he was. Not close, not far, a shape in the half-light. Bare, older, thinner around the shoulders, but unmistakable. He didn't stay long, just stood there, watching. Then, for the first time, he made a sound. A low, rumbling chuff, almost like a sigh. Claire didn't move, didn't breathe. She felt the air between them, heavy and still, like a glass bell waiting to be rung. Then he turned and walked away. No drama, no farewell, just a presence acknowledged. A circle closed. Claire stayed there long after the darkness swallowed him. She knew what it meant. He came back. Not because he needed her, but because he remembered. And because, in his world, some debts are repaid not in action, but in return. Autumn rolled in with a quiet kind of grace. The forest canopy shifted from deep green to shades of amber and rust, and the nights brought a sharper chill that cut through even the thickest wool layers. Claire felt it in her bones before she saw it in the leaves. The season turning, the chapter closing. She stayed on at Fireline Ridge through October, then into early November. Not out of duty, not even curiosity. Just presence. She spent more time walking than writing, more time listening than tracking. She'd learned that not every moment in nature needed to be measured. Some were meant to be absorbed. Every so often, she'd spot signs. A tuft of fur caught on a bramble, a half-eaten snowshoe hare near a game trail. Prints that looked too fresh to belong to anyone else. Bear hadn't left entirely. He was simply living now, as he should. One morning, she found herself back at the old den site. Not out of expectation, just following an old path her feet knew well. The hollow beneath the cedar was empty, overgrown with pine needles and brush. The entrance was barely visible now, sunken slightly from months of disuse. But there, half covered by fallen leaves, was something she didn't expect. The flannel shirt, still folded, still there. Claire crouched down slowly, brushed off the debris. The fabric was worn, sun-faded, edges frayed by time and weather, but intact, untouched. She ran her hand over the fabric, then brought it to her chest. It didn't smell like Noah anymore. It smelled like earth, rain, memory, and something else. Forgiveness. She pressed her forehead to it for a long, still moment. Then she stood, cradling the shirt in her arms like something sacred, and turned back toward the ridge. Weeks passed. Snow fell. The forest hushed beneath its white blanket. Claire submitted her final report to the Wildlife Division. It wasn't long. Just the essentials. Kootenai territory. Unusual paternal behavior observed in male lynx. Estimated 3 surviving kits. No signs of abnormal aggression. Family dispersed naturally. Recommend protection of Fireline Ridge area for future observation. But she knew the real story wasn't in the data. It was in the silence, in the storm, in the unspoken agreement between a woman with too much loss and an animal who chose to stay. She gave notice in early December. Her body was tired. Her heart, while healing, needed stillness. She'd done her work. Now it was time to let it rest. Her final night on the ridge was clear and cold. Stars shimmered above like scattered ice. She lit a small fire and made one last cup of coffee, then wrapped herself in the old flannel one more time. Noah would have loved it here, she thought. Not for the science, for the quiet, for the way the trees whispered if you listened just long enough. And maybe, just maybe, for the way a wild creature can teach you to love again. She sat there until the fire died. Then she stood, packed her gear, and took one last look toward the trees. She didn't expect to see him, and she didn't. But she felt him. In the hush, in the stillness, in the shared breath of a night that didn't need words to be understood. Spring returned the following year, soft and slow. The snow melted in gentle rivulets down the ridges, and the forest floor bloomed with new life. Insects hummed, and songbirds returned to their branches like long-lost notes finding their melody again. Claire didn't come back to Fireline Ridge right away. She spent the winter further south, volunteering at a wildlife rehab center near Flathead Lake. She helped mend broken wings, bottle feed orphaned fawns, and train younger field workers. It was quieter work, steady, kind. But as the thaw came and the days stretched longer, she felt the call. Not in her head, in her chest. So one crisp April morning, she packed a small day bag, tucked the old flannel shirt carefully inside, and drove north along the winding forest roads. She parked near the old logging trail and walked the last few miles on foot, her boots pressing into soil she hadn't touched in months. The ridge was as she remembered, still, reverent, alive. The cedar tree had weathered the winter, the hollow beneath it now filled with soft moss and needles, no fresh signs, no tracks, just the whisper of memory in the branches. Claire didn't expect them to be there. That wasn't why she came. She pulled the flannel from her pack and sat cross-legged on the earth, laying the shirt across her lap. She closed her eyes and breathed. There was no sound except for wind and the occasional chirp of a chickadee. And then, just as the breeze shifted, she felt it. A presence. Not behind her, beside her. She opened her eyes slowly. And there, across the clearing, framed by shafts of morning light, stood a lynx. It wasn't Bear. This one was younger, leaner. The ear slashes were similar, but not identical. He stood tall, head high, muscles taut, watching. Behind him, barely visible in the underbrush, two smaller shapes lingered. Kits. Yearlings, maybe. Just old enough to follow. Just young enough to still need. Claire smiled. She didn't move. Didn't wave. She simply stayed still, breathing in the moment. The young lynx looked at her, and then, in that familiar gesture passed down like a story, he blinked, slow, steady, trusting. Claire felt her chest swell, not with sorrow, but something lighter, something like grace. She laid the flannel shirt gently on the moss beside her. A gift, a memory, a bridge. And then she stood, turned slowly, and walked away. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because sometimes the wild remembers. And sometimes it says thank you in silence, in the blink of a golden eye, in the breath of a new spring morning, and in the legacy of love that never needed words to begin with.